We've been working and repairing what was until recently a broken city centre. In 1991, together with 7 other architectural practices, we formed Group 91, and we entered an international urban design competition for Temple Bar, which was an area in the centre of Dublin, stretching from here to Trinity College, and we won. We were interested in grain and pattern. Our projects have given us the opportunity to work in Temple Bar, as I've described, which is along the river Liffey, within Trinity College, a gated university within the heart of Dublin, repairing the lanes of the 18th century Merrion Square, and our most recent project just being completed of St. Stephen's Green, which is a large public space in Dublin. And our project is for the Office of Public Works. It's a government office which is the first of its kind since the 1930s to build a discrete government office in our country. In our first project in Trinity College, for a Department of Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering, in developing the brief, there was an element within in the programme that didn't have to be ground-based. So we took that element, which was an acoustic laboratory, and raised it above the podium, making a symbolic gesture to the campus in terms of this particular department. And at the same time as we were developing this project in Trinity, we were also working with structural engineers in the development of motorway bridges. And what we found through that work was the capacity of large-scale structure to influence space. This is the entrance porch of a school that we have completed in Galway. And what's significant for us, and why we're presenting it to you tonight, is that it holds 2 pieces, it frames 2 parts. One is the landscape, the groundscape, and the other is the sky. And for us, the interesting point of this place is that within our work, the issue of anchoring to the ground, to the topography, is critically important. And also that the relationship to the sky is the opportunity to allow animation, to make connections and to capture movement. This is the same school, but dealing with it in another, looking at other aspect of it. It takes the hillside and carves the topography on the ground, and also carves the topography of the roof. And in the project, we brought the space of the landscape into the body of the school itself. In this image, this is really dealing with very restrictive budgets in essentially radically important landscape locations. And what we have found is that the choice of the construction is critically important in the making of the space. And sometimes the construction method is the starting point in terms of design. So essentially tonight, we are focusing on our project in Milan, the Bocconi University in Milan, because we feel that it amalgamates these issues that I've talked about in terms of grain, symbolism, major structure. So we will go through in detail tonight the Bocconi project.
The title La Nostra Milano, it's not meant to be proprietorial, but Yvonne was just mentioning that we've worked in Dublin most of our practicing lives, and the prospect of coming to a new city and building a building in a new place as foreigners was very challenging to us. And what we felt was that in order to make a building of this place and in this place, that we had to somehow take ownership of Milan as a city and somehow let it get under our skins in a sense, so that we were no longer strangers to the city. So what we're going to show this evening is, or what we're going to tell you, is a sort of story of 5 years' work in the city, but trying to touch on the kind of key preoccupations that we have in our work. The site for the Bocconi project this is our competition model set into the context of the city. It's just outside of the Spanish Walls. It's about 20 minutes walk, 25 minutes walk south of the Duomo. Unlike Trinity College, it's not a gated university, and we were one of 10 competitors, and we're really honoured that Laurent Boutouin has attended here this evening, because he was one of the competitors and made a beautiful project, which I'm sure he felt should have won. But we're really happy that he has come here this evening. All of the architects that were as part of this competition were architects whose work has inspired us hugely in our own working lives. And just describing this process of coming to Milan, not just as a tourist, but with the challenge of trying to make a building. And before we came, we obviously had a brief and had done some work, and there were things in the air in our office, independent of this project, really. And the things in the air were, referred to this interest in sky, what we call skyscape and groundscape, the Square Fen, Venice Biennale pavilion on the left, and the Byrne landscape in the west of Ireland on the right, somehow describes what we mean. There was an interest that we had in that kind of potential interstitial space that could exist between the groundscape and the skyscape. The possibility of making a perforate roof which might hover over worked ground, and that one could make space which didn't have boundaries, was something that came up in other smaller projects, but somehow was relevant in this project. And because of working on the motorway bridges, we were also became really interested in structure and the infrastructural capacity of architecture, or the infrastructural capacity of structure to release space, not just within a building, but within the city. And the Lina Bobardi Sao Paulo Museum was a building that we found really inspirational prior to Bocconi, and also went back to look at this project during the Bocconi project, because she made an urban space in the undercroft of this fantastic 80-metre span. And it's a post-tensioned beams from which the gallery spaces are hung. And just because we were in Paris, we put in this project for Le Magasin Généraux, because we were one of, I think, the 11 firms who entered this competition. And the project we made in some ways connects with what we're saying, where we thought about trying to make a public space to continue the park, and to make the roof of this concrete frame building, to make the roof into a public space. It's not unlike the scheme that we saw today, actually, in the Société, this architecture, where we saw the winning project. In the sense that we were focusing on the roof as being public space and filling the undercroft with shops. But we had this idea of making a sort of horizontal fly tower, that somehow we would frame a space, in the city, which would be almost like a grand stage at the scale of cities. So, I mean, this was a further investigation for us in terms of architecture as infrastructure. And that one could make a microplanet, that this fly tower would have the capacity to make a microplanet in the undercroft, be it for ice skating in the winter, or cooling the parkland in the summertime. And at the time that we were invited to do the Bocconi project, the Bocconi project was 10 times larger than anything that we had ever done before. And we were making this small but very important building for us in University College Dublin, which is a new urban institute, which is about 800 square metres. But in terms of the way that we were investigating this project was this thing with a very thin structure of concrete piers, which work in one direction, which stratified the programme in terms of layers of privacy required, and somehow stitching in the other direction a structure for roof lights, which would take light deep into quite a compact plan. We found that spatially there was a kind of, there was a real surprise that somehow making space in a strategic way as opposed to a compositional way led to a sort of open-endedness which we really enjoyed. And we translated that, or that was in our pockets, so to speak, when we were given this huge challenge to think about the Bocconi project. So these are the sketches that we came to Milan with, where we were looking at the site of the existing university and really trying to find what Yvonne talked about earlier, this thing of trying to find some kind of urban grain or some kind of urban measure, almost like music in a way, to see, well, what could be the measure or the rhythm of structure or of elements that we could make which would give form to this program, which was for offices for 1,000 professors. So it was in total 45,000 square metres of accommodation, half of which was supposed to be below ground, which was the reason for us looking at the Salk Institute and the way that Karen dealt with the laboratories and sunken courts, and also looking at sunken churches in Ethiopia, and the fact that one could make a high architecture even below ground and make ritualistic routes which would connect ground level to spaces below ground. And in searching for a structure, we were interested in this idea of making the offices into a plate which might hover over the ground of the site, and that was what these first sketches were about. And we were also thinking, I suppose, having worked in Trinity College and also in University College Dublin, and having worked in the city, there was this whole issue of, well, what is the university within the city? And what is the ideal relationship between university and city? And so we thought that the landscape of the city should, or the question was, could we take the landscape of the city right through and into the campus, through the building, that the building would act almost like a sort of filter between city and campus, and that we would work the ground and the accommodation that was below ground, that we would in a way try to eliminate the boundary between that accommodation that was supposed to be below ground, that we would forget about that, and that we would allow those spaces to erupt, and that we would take courts and light deep into the ground to bring light with them. And going back to the Sfer Fen image or metaphor or sort of inspiration, we started to think about offices for 1,000 people being like an inhabited light filter, that one could make a huge roof through which light would come and make public space below. So this was us trying to get a measure of how many floors and what size were things on the site and how would they fit. And then, of course, you come to a city, and the city kind of hits you. You meet this big city in a different way, no longer as a tourist, so you look at it in a completely different way, like a sort of scavenger looking for clues as to how one might start to work. And the big things that were important for us, and I mean, this is our site. The first thing that struck us was how unglamorous the street was, how not pretty. It was not the stylish Milan we were expecting. And it was a really gritty kind of street, and it was misty, foggy October, where you couldn't tell the time of day, where kind of time stands still at that time of year in Milan. It has a really interesting atmosphere. So it was a kind of, it was a revelation, I suppose. But what we really loved was things like the floor of the city, that they have this deep granite floor, which they use on the roads, sometimes not on the pavements, but on the roads, and that had a real potency. And there was also the architectural heritage of the campus, that Bocconi had employed Muzio in the past, very strong, heroic, rationalist buildings with fantastically robust interiors. I mean, much of it is now destroyed actually by use and abuse over the years. This is a library building by Muzio, which is a fantastic building. And then the earlier Pagano building, again, a very disciplined, very beautiful sequence of buildings, the Muzio and Pagano buildings on the campus. So again, that was another challenge. And then the challenge of the city itself, as I say, this Asnaga and Vendor, and then we have the Velasquez Tower behind, just the bigness of the scale in comparison with Dublin. But there was also around the corner on Corso Italia, the sort of deconstructed urban block of Moretti, which was a different heritage in terms of contemporary architecture in Italy, more elemental and more expressive, and that somehow registered with us. And in terms of our idea about what university should be, the beauty of the Il Broletto market building just off the Duomo Square was something that we kept going back to and say, well, wouldn't it be fantastic if the ground floor of our building felt as open as this, felt like a real place of exchange, a real sort of filter between urban life and the life of the university. And as architects, I suppose one also has to operate on the subjective or tactile or immediate level. So there was the sort of small things that struck us in terms of how the buildings around the corner within 5 minutes walk of this site, they used materials which we'd never seen this kind of stone used in this kind of rustic stone used in this highly urban situation. It has a weighty sort of monolithic quality, and how the walls of the streets, so many of the streets feel so impenetrable and hard, and yet when you go through you sometimes find a beautiful aviary or a courtyard, and there's that sense of the friendly interior and the hard exteriors, and it's more impenetrable than many other Italian cities. And these are two local stones. This is called Ceppo, which we subsequently used, and this is called Beola. And as I say, we hadn't seen stone used and worked and kind of carved in this kind of in this particular kind of way in other cities. And this corner, we were in Stockholm the other day looking again at the Celsing building in the city centre in Stockholm, and that's that and some of Gioponti's work is the only time we've seen that kind of robust material used in that kind of way. And again, we went back to look at apart from this beautiful facade, which is the subject of a whole other discussion, but just the way that Gioponti used this local Beola stone to anchor his building, the apartment building overlooking Giardini Pubblici. And they use the same stone on the ground as they use on the walls. This is Sant'Ambrogio, where the Beola is used on the ground. And going back then to more contemporary use of this local Ceppo stone, the joints are much smaller than, this is quite contemporary, this building. The joints are much smaller than would be in the way that we use stone, because they don't hang it, because it's fixed directly to the concrete or the masonry wall behind. So their joints are much tinier. So the buildings have this kind of weight and monolithic quality, which was something we wanted to work with.
Okay, so in the story of the competition, we now ask the question, what things remained the same? So we arrived with our ideas, having studied the brief or the schedule of accommodation, the aspiration of the brief, to Milan. And as Shelley has referred to, the issue of how you can make a space which allows for exchange, but it's really the freedom that the structure allows for that blurring of the datum between one space and another, and which allows for a connection. So what we had in terms of our site is that we had a short axis, a long axis, a very noisy street on Viale Brini, a quiet residential street along this axis here on Via Rundkin. And by interpreting the offices as inhabited light filters, as louvers, and by making voids, we began to make this idea of an abacus, so that you could have an organization which we came to Milan with the office bars actually facing east-west, which meant that we had we had light on them north and south, and we felt that that was too extreme in terms of the impact of the sun. So we changed them to this axis, which meant that each of the offices had an east-west orientation and north-north-south. And this allowed us to have a series of courts between them. By separating the bars of offices, we had courts which penetrated below. So the two things which became fascinating for us is that we could break the scale of the site by establishing these diaphragm walls, which became the, if you like, the upper streets or the connecting pieces of the scheme, and by the manipulation of the office bars that we could make courtyards that allowed light to filter down. And these are paper models which, if you like, illustrate a preoccupation with manipulating groundscape. Was there a way of being able to take ground down to change ground? And these two strategies, the first strategy that we looked at was, could we bring the city deep into the section by having an anchoring here and bringing the bars of space across, anchoring onto what we developed was the library component. But we found then that we had structure interfering between the office spaces and the lower spaces. And what became for us a kind of crucial moment in the design of this project was to say, what if we took the structure that, instead of it being relating to the ground, if this was the manipulated lower level, what if we took the structure of the offices and hung them from the upper levels above? It meant that if the beams were the main structure was placed at this level, that we could hang the offices, and that sometimes we could have long hangings of offices with the low soffit, and short hangings here where you'd have a higher soffit. So it meant that architecturally you had ground-hugging spaces and you had sky-hugging spaces, and that the architectural component became the void between the two ideas. So we get an idea of upper structure. We get these these steel ties which hang down, from which the plates of the offices are hung. This is Shelley referred to this beautiful floor of Milan, this kind of range of stones which forms a continuity. And the other issue which we refer to, that the Bocconi University is not a gated space, it's not a walled enclosure, it takes part in the city of Milan. These buildings, which are part of the complex, have an easy relationship, and students mingle with the rest of Milan from these buildings. And what we wanted to do in our plan was to have a continuation of that surface, so that the public would feel that there was some connection between the Viale Lini, Via Röntgen, as a way through. And in terms of strategy, what we would do is there was one key element in the project that we interpreted as the major possibility of connection with the city, and that was the big room, the Grand Salon, which was the Aula Magna for 1,000 people. And we decided that by placing the Aula Magna on the toughest, hardest position within the city, that what we had was a type of shoulder, if you like, in terms of structuring the space, but really the way we described it was that we would place it to be visible, to make a connection to city, and that it became a great window to Milan, which I'll describe in a minute. So we have this very, very busy street here, which was noisy, had the trams, very narrow, was not the place for entering. And what we organised was that we said, we will see the main element of the project at this position, but we will delay entrance, and that we will bring entrance down the secondary street and have a deep finger of space which brings you to the main coordinating position of the plan, which is in, I'll bring you to it now. So essentially what we did, this is the main noisy street, this is the quieter street at the side. We have the main entrance position on street gauge. If you are a student, you continue through onto the campus. If you arrive to go to the Aula Magna, you arrive into this position here, you go down the grand staircase to -5 here, and then you enter into the Aula Magna at this position. So when you're in this white space here, you're 5 meters below the busy city above. And that allows us to control movement, but also make a connection. It does two things. One, that space relates back out to the city in the form of the aula, but it also brings the city in. So when you're in this position, your relation to the city is framed. The other issue we had to deal with was these 1,000 professors. So in the same sense as 1,000 is like a mini city, the professors arrive and they have their grand entrance here with their staircase. So they're corralled into this position. There were two elements in the brief that we felt were important, that we took, of the 10 departments in this Bocconi University, we took the library element of each of the departments and grouped them together so that they formed a type of canopy, a linear space held above as a type of armour. So here we have the next strategic move for us, infrastructural move, was that every 25 metres you had these bridges, which are diaphragm wall structure, which allowed us to set up the rhythm of the office level, but it also allowed us to make a labyrinth of movement in the north-south direction. So you've got these as constant every 25 metres, and you've got these corridors which change and move depending on the requirements for the offices. And as we moved them, we were able to make these scoops of space, which were the voids that brought light down to the lower level. This is a long section through the project where you see the street level of Viale Glini here, halfway between the upper world and halfway between the lower world. So this is the ground level running through, and you have the lower level below, which contains the lower part of the Aula Magna, the lower conference facilities down below. And as you move up through the section, you get these variety of upper spaces which are bringing light deep into the plan. So the short section shows the darker pieces in this diagram section, shows you the position of the structure, hanging the offices and hanging gardens, which allow us to allow light to come in a kind of a clear story situation here. We have our connection to the from the main campus down into this is -5 level, and also the grouping of the library into these smaller spaces, which acts as a type of trust onto the edge of this secondary street. In this other section, you see the grand staircase for the professors, which continues up in the space that we call a type of nave. So you get the main body of the building, the separated library, and this space, which is a cut space between the two, the street level coming through and carving down to the -5 and the -9. This was a perspective which we worked on during the competition, which is really trying to describe that type of trap space between the hung soffit of the offices, the reaching up to bring light down to these deeper spaces as we carve down to the conference level. So this is street level working through, and the soffits forming this and the next perspective, showing the kind of working and the potential of the hanging structure. So by obliterating the structure at ground level, by moving it to an upper level and carving on the lower level below, we had this variety we had this potential for a variety of space. You've got the university with the ramp coming down -5, -9 to the lower level. This is the -5, which is below the street level here. So you get this series of connections, not only horizontally, not only vertically, but diagonally. And what things changed? We arrived with a strategy, but we hadn't got a language. And as Shelley has described, we arrived as a type of architectural detectives to this place to see what particular things could be harnessed or used or mined to become part of this project. And in the original kind of struggle with the accommodation and the brief, we had the Aula Magna as a single story or small story part of the project buried deep in the basement. And we felt, like in the project that I showed very early on in Trinity College, that there was an element within this project that needed to tell a story to the city of Milan. that the reason why Bocconi were making this project is that they wanted to reach out symbolically, architecturally, in some way to say, we have a formal presence, we are contributing to Milan as a city, and we have something to give and something to receive. So what we did is that we moved the Aula Magna from a normal, ordinary place in the basement to being expressed on the very edge of the site where Viale Blini and the university touched. And this kind of great eruption of the Aula Magna meant that it was legible. And we call it, if you like, our great window to Milan. That you had this point where the Aula and the void under the Aula was actually making a connection. And this is a collage showing the separation of the library component acting as a type of shield on the side street. And we allowed the office, the bars of office space to come through and are expressed with their voids onto the Viale Blini. And this came, Shelley referred to various contemporary architectural references in Milan, and this type of expressive use of form by Moretti was something that gave us the courage to move in this direction. So here was the main connection to Milan. Shelley described as kind of foggy, misty, highly used and workaday place in Milan, and this was our site. And our first kind of studies, our pencil studies and inlays, where the bars of the offices are expressed, that we have the Aula Magna rearing its surface and structure up to allow you to make some connection. And there's one place which I should have referred to on the plan, which is really significant, and it's a tiny little move, but there's a small little laneway, which when you're coming down the Viale Blini allows you to slip into the campus. And it is something that interests us, that whole hierarchy of streets, lanes, public space, that by keeping this little slip route and laneway, not only does it allow another connection to the city, but it also allows a bar of light. The south light actually penetrates deep onto this other street through that crack. And this was an important collage for us in the competition, because it was a description of our building on a wet or foggy day in Milan, that you have this as our main contribution, this window to Milan, with the aula form clearly expressed with the garden above. And this was the 1 to 500 model, which is part of the presentation for the competition, where you see the carved lower groundscape with the courtyards bringing light deep below. You get the aula beginning to erupt the space below, and this is the combination of the 10 library rooms to this crust, this hard crust on the side street. You get the bars of the offices with the diaphragm walls, corridors beginning to show the courts between these bars of offices, the position of the roof beams, and it coming together as a model. The side, the library as a composite, the entrance being delayed coming down the side street to this position, and the alley. These were important drawings for us during the competition. This line drawing shows what we've just been talking about in terms of the aula and expression, but also in terms of how this conglomerate of uses was going to be entered. And this pencil drawing is one where we enter along between the crack between the main building with the aula and the hovering library component in through this nave. And we got the kind of courage looking at this as Hospitale Maggiore, which is the School of Law in Milan at the moment, which has this beautiful long finger space in front of it. And we felt that it was possible to make this space the hard street here and to delay the entrance along the side street into this moment of cut. There's an amazing space on the roof of the Duomo in Milan, which is the walkways at the higher level on the stone, which is a fantastic sense of theatre and drama, where people are walking through the buttresses. And we felt that this level of drama or theatre could be incorporated in our diaphragm walls, where when you moved across the site, that you had these connections from not only from the offices above, but also the spaces below. So you had the conference and the offices having this kind of not only educational but spatial relationship. And we felt that the two issues of student life and professor's life, that not only was there a blurring of the datum between city and university, but also vertically, that you could have students and professors linking across the section, so that the world of the professors was connected to the world of the students, and the world of the students vice versa.
So we won this competition in 2002, and as every architect knows, there's always a worry about what's going to happen. How will we survive, and how will the project survive? And I think we've been very lucky, because the university decided that they didn't want us to amalgamate with an Italian office, that they would give us the support system that we needed to do the project in Dublin, which is what we did, except for construction stage, obviously. And I think, I mean, there are certain, it wasn't all one big rosy happy story like any construction project, but we feel in the end that the project has survived for this very reason, that the client had the determination to support and to push and to build this building. And when we had to move very quickly from competition stage to reality and choose materials and I suppose try and touch that note that we were referring to in terms of our observations and perceptions in relation to the city, we were asked very, very soon what kind of stone we would use, and we immediately referred to this stone which we had seen around the streets, and went to the quarry, which was a fantastic revelation for us, because we hadn't been to a quarry where it's mined from the inside out as opposed to the outside in. But it was just also seeing the stone in its raw state, that it somehow had the same character as the way it was used in the buildings. It had that same kind of monolithic character. And Yvonne actually refers to this stone as being like geological concrete, which it is. It's like when you make a cube test of concrete, when you're cutting through the aggregate. It has that same kind of quality. And so we were given the team, a competition stage. We worked with RFR in Paris as engineers, but when we won the competition, there was an Italian team appointed by the university, essentially. And the thing took off, really. And just looking at the scale of the construction and how we started to interpret this idea of the main element and how it would present itself to the city, and in a way we're showing a lot of construction images, because for us this whole process has been a revelation and has been, I suppose, an extraordinary experience in the sense that not only were we working in another country, we were working at a completely different scale with the kind of expertise that, engineering expertise certainly, that we hadn't experienced in Ireland, because the engineering tradition in Italy is so completely different and so much better. And what started to be really clear as the project was being built was that this thing that we really wanted of taking the city into the building, or the building continually reaching out to the city, both in plan and in section. And the sense of scale and weight and mass. We're in the undercroft of the Aula Magna. These would be the entrances, and then there's staircases up to the upper levels of the Aula Magna. So here we're 5 metres below street level. This is the main public space that Yvonne referred to, going deep into the plan, into the entrance courtyard, which is about here. Then you come into the upper foyer, you come down ground stairs to 5 metres below ground, and you're in this undercroft of this weighty element hovering above you, reaching out to the streets beyond. And then Yvonne described it as a kind of shoulder or a kind of anchor to it's like a head and tail in a sense. This is the thing that really anchors the project. And then you have the rhythm of the walls and the bridges and offices starting as we move south. And probably one of the other big challenge for us was to make the interior, it's still not a finished story actually, to make the interior of the Aula Magna. And we went back to these photos when we did 3 or 4 schemes for the Aula Magna, and I think that's because essentially it's the only interior in the building. Everything else is the skeleton, there is no other lining or question. But because it was an auditorium, there was issues of cost, there was issues issues of everything actually. This study model shows us looking at the idea of making a series of contours, the ground, the walls, the ceiling, which would deal with the seating, the acoustics, the lighting, and that it would feel like some kind of piece of geology, which in some way would have this kind of sense of the way that the quarry walls were cut. And I suppose our main problem was that we really felt that a timber lining wasn't appropriate in this project because it's just so heavy, and somehow making a light lining didn't seem appropriate. And we looked to the Sydney Opera House, and Utsen's writings as much as his sketches in relation to the lining of the Sydney Opera House, while it was going to be in plywood, he talks about the contours of the exterior or the landscape of the exterior being taken into the landscape of the interior. So we're making this in stone. This was the competition drawing. We were hedging our bets here, which could be terracotta, it could be timber. But the important thing also was that we were stitching up into the sort of belly of the offices above, making these light scoops, because it will be used primarily for conference. And because we were asked to make this divisible into 2 rooms for 400 and 600, we made a 2-tiered Aula Magna with the potential for division between the 2. And these were other studies in pre-cast concrete, where we were using precast concrete or precast terracotta fins or planks, again behind which within which the acoustic lining would be held, and that didn't happen. And this was the project we did for the Venice Biennale, where again we were looking at a way of folding the walls, and within the folds and the cuts that we would deal with the acoustics and the lighting, and looking in detail at the relationship of this room to the street, to the undercroft, the upper and lower, the light scoops, and abstracting the offices above. And just because we're showing one project, we just want to refer to maybe other projects, which this project happened during the course of the whole Bocconi project, because it's been 5 years. And this is a theatre project 1 hour from Dublin in a town called Navan. And it has taken from the Bocconi project in some ways. It's quite different in the sense that it was designed to be a courthouse, which was to be completely separate from the theatre below. So we've used the topography of the ground, the natural topography of the ground, to make the theatre. And we've made another world quite separate and quite different up above, which is to be the world of the courthouse. And the facilities would be shared between the court and the theatre, and the fly tower would be housed within the section. It was also to do with layers of foyer and public space before entering the theatre. But it's trying to make a theatre which again had a sense of mass, using concrete walls, and using the studies that we had done for Bocconi, which were discontinued for various reasons. We actually used that system in this theatre and made a concrete floor, which we covered in terrazzo, so it has quite a weighty presence. And the other challenge during the Bocconi project, but also previous projects, was how to make glass walls which have some depth and some richness. And in quite an economical way, we've made a glass wall in this building, which has, by combining structure with white glass and clear glass and frosted glass, it does have this sense of being a kind of a veil, as opposed to just being a single layered window. So going back to our Bocconi project, this sense of the carved exterior, and moving on to this this beginning of the veiled interior of the courtyards and the wish to make quite a different, lighter, airier, reflective kind of world within, in contrast with the exterior. And these were early studies looking at that. And Yvonne referred to the library building, the only part of this building which breaks the tyranny of the office floor plate are these interconnecting double height and single height volumes, because we felt that the library should be a place where the sort of regimentation of the floor plates should disappear, and that somehow it would encourage some kind of social interchange. So the architecture of this three-dimensional screen is quite different to the architecture of the offices. But looking at how we were trying to get this sense of moving under something that's hovering through this crack between two solids, but into a lighter world behind. And the sort of encouragement that small projects we had spent months working on and slaving over in years gone by, we're wondering why we bothered, because nobody seemed to appreciate it, least of all the client. And but you find that the years and years of this research, you know, feed into a big project, because we wouldn't, without doing these, this is a small cinema project where we used a double layer of glass planks and sliding glass walls. And when we won the Bocconi project, our client came to see this building, and we were able to talk about this thing of making glass screens have depth. And so we had the kind of fluency to be able to move and think about making this glass facade in the courtyards of the Bocconi project, where we made these hanging glass shingles which act as environmental protection as well as privacy protection for the professors. And the other, as well as Lena Bobardi, we've also looked a lot at Eileen Gray and been really jealous of this. I know it's just a screen, but really wanted to make a facade with this kind of weight, and at the same time that it would feel like it could move. And this very crude black model shows us starting to look at that library facade in that same kind of way, and then taming it down and just making a series of worked planes which are pushed forward to hang out over the street and are directly connected to the volumes behind. And again, just to try and stitch in other projects into that, this was a collage study for the public building that Yvonne was speaking about, overlooking St. Stephen's Green. And we won't go into it in detail, but just to say that that kind of weighty sort of language of making walls is something that we have taken from the Bocconi project, I suppose, using a completely different language here in Dublin, where we used a solid outer skin and tried to use glass flush and glass recessed to make a three-dimensional dynamic what is a facade to an office building. And just looking at that in more detail, dealing with environmental issues of ventilating grills, sliding windows, fixed windows, and making that kind of screen to the city. But back again to this wish for weight and mass at the ground level, and back to Il Broletto and the scale of the columns and the scale of that structure. But also, at a certain point, we were worried that the undercroft of the project would be gloomy and dour. But when we went to this quarry, when we went literally in through the mountain, into the interior, into this amazing man-made space, which is the cut geometric voids of the quarried space within, with this huge window to a lake and to a mountain beyond. We felt that to have that sense of carved space in the undercroft of Bocconi would be a wonderful thing. And this is -9. This is one of the secondary conference spaces, but just how again in the land the light penetrates buildings in a different way to Dublin, and the scale of spaces that were emerging during the course of construction, and the need to make big moves to give legibility and to place you within what is quite a large building. So using these big ramps as big beams, again spanning between the columns placed at 25 metres, so you go from 0 to -5 to -9. So trying to take the world of the university deep into foyer and conference levels, as well as trying to take the world of the city into the building. And at a certain moment when we went to Milan, again going back to this thing of not being able to build a good project without a good client, our client was absolutely exhausted. He was completely drained. He had problems left, right and centre of money, of construction, of all the usual things, and he said, I'm so tired. And then he cheered himself up, he told me, because he realised that if he took our building and stood it up, that it would be enormous. It would be bigger than anything else in Milan, so maybe it was worth it, because it's 70 metres long, it's 170 metres, 70 metres deep, it's 170 metres long, it's 44 metres high. So he was saying, well, if we stood it up, it would be bigger than anything in Milan, so it's worth all this energy. And we thought there was a really interesting, I suppose what we experienced was the kind of dedication and commitment and ruthless determination that's needed to make a project like this at so many different levels. But also there was something very provocative about that term, skyscraper, sleep, which no doubt we'll use in some way in the future. And then how this sleeping skyscraper has unfolded itself. What we spoke about in the beginning, this thing of making space which would have no boundaries, is something that has actually emerged because our approach to this building is strategic and not compositional, that somehow we're placing one world over another, that it's the voids between those two precise elements that have this kind of indeterminate quality, which has been really exciting for us during the course of the project, where you're standing here at 9 metres below ground, you're looking up to a foyer at 5 metres below ground, you're looking at the city coming into the building at street level, you're looking up to the first layer of bridges, and you're starting to see diagonally, you're starting to get diagonal views right up and through the building, up to the undercroft of suspended gardens. This is a hole left temporarily for the crane to erect the facade, so that was filled in at a later stage. But it gives a sense of how the structure was releasing space and had a real three-dimensional quality. So at times we felt guilty that the moves were too big and that the structure was too heroic and too demanding. But then as it unfolded, we could see that it was really starting to be worth it, where you could stand and see a suspended garden which is taking light into an interior space which is 3 floors high, and that you're looking, that there was somehow this kind of labyrinth unfolding. And these big structural moves give, as I say, give legibility to what is quite a labyrinthine kind of construct.
So we want to discuss, anchoring. Anchoring in the sense that you have a ground plane which is relying on the normal use of the word gravity, that it's down below, that it's carved. We wanted to bring light deeper than we've ever done it before. And this paper model, which we referred to earlier on, just shows this kind of ambition to carve and move and stretch the space. The enabling works for the project took 1 year to complete on its own. This was to make the site ready to receive the building process. And what was interesting was that it had to be done in a number of phases, because the water table was at -11. So it was done in 3 parts, and it was carved out to get to a point where we'd reached the water table. And at that point, they had to begin pounding in these series of columns, which would push down to the water table and hold the water below. So this is the water oozing from the water table below. These are the columns being pounded in. So it's a whole, like the Giant's Causeway. These were pounded in like a series of columns to make a new ground, a new containment. But on the edge of the wall here, before all of this happened, into the edges of the site, were these, sorry, I'll just go back to them there, were in 5 metre pores. These great walls of concrete were carved down into the earth, using the earth as permanent, as shuttering. So we get these 5 metre strips of retaining walls, which hold the site like a basin. And then you see these points here, which are groups of tie rods, which are pushed into the earth at a 25-degree angle for 30 metres to hold these walls into position. So these walls as 5 metre strips with these anchors of tie rods pushing into the earth to hold the whole basin of the container. And here's someone cooling these the pile drivers as it's going into the earth. And here you see these 5 metre pores of concrete which have been driven right down. You now see the water table level oozing through at this point, and you see the points of the rods. Beginning now, this is the steel for the underneath the feet of the great diaphragm walls, which are happening every 25 metres. So you see the scale of the operation, the retaining wall and the steel to receive the structure. And just as a resume for you, that you have the car parking level below, the carved earth of the courtyards, the beginning of the aula, the plates of the offices, the spaces carved for the offices, and at the very top, the structure of the structure to hang the offices. And this diagram, what's interesting for us is that in terms of the plan, and Shelley showed that project in University College Dublin, which had the structure going north-south and the roof lights going east-west. What's interesting for us in the organisation of these diaphragm walls is that on the ground plane, the movement was north-south, so they are switching to take the movement in that direction. On the upper floors, where they're dealing with the offices, they become twin diaphragm walls which hold the corridors. So here we have the lower great columns. We have these columns then turning into diaphragm walls to hold corridors, and then we have these walls continuing up to become the surfaces on which the great beams hang. And this was an earlier stage where we were looking at transferring the beam at the level just above the public space. And we didn't do this because what was happening was that the structure was, we were aware of structure at this point. Rather than liberating the two spaces, we had structure at the very point that we didn't want it. And this diagram of the structure shows the twinning of the walls by the aula magna, the columns facing north-south at the lower level, the corridors filling in, the structural beams up above, and stacking the floors of the offices. And just this diagram axonometric of the structure, it's very interesting for us because these are at the 24 metres, they're 3.6 metres wide in terms of circulation. They take all our services across this grid, but also that they were asked to be versatile. So each of these elevations had to be modified as each of the labyrinthine cross corridors reached them. So no two elevations are the same. Each of those diaphragm walls not only had to be structured to take the roof, but they also had to take the cross beams of the offices. So just going through the plan quickly, you have the aula magna to the aula glini, you have these series of voids which are lighting below, you have the beginning of the ex-library or the library, and as you go up through the labyrinthine collection of the offices, it gets more and more dense. Excuse me. In terms of section, what was interesting for us is that you have the street level, the ventilation down to the car park, moving through into the school, the existing university, the ramp that Shelley has called the big moves, which is bringing you down first of all to the -5 and further down to the -9 level. And you have the foyer, which is the point of connection. And you see here in this sketch section the strength of these columns as they are twisting. They are 3.6 by 1.2 in terms of dimension. So they are. We're seeing the short axis. That's 1.2 here, as they go south. And here's one of the hanging gardens, which gives light down below. You've got the nave of the space between the offices and the library, the nave space. Just two of the diaphragm walls. As we've said, these are the construction drawings of how the various levels hit into this as a space. This is the diaphragm wall, just as it's acting as the 22-metre cantilever for the Alemania. It was very interesting. Shelley was describing the fantastic support of the structural engineers. When we did the competition, we were a bit worried about a 22-metre cantilever, and we had 2 columns underneath this just in case it needed it. But as soon as the structural engineer was working on it, he removed those columns, saying that if he had to do them, he'd be the laughing stock of Milan. So it was good for us that this capacity for this 22-metre cantilever wasn't interrupted by the 2 columns that we had intended there. And this is a series of images, just as the diary of the building as it's being built. The first things to be completed, these great diaphragm walls are rising every 24 metres from the feet below. So these were built first, and as they become stripped of their scaffolding, you see the way the elevations of these connections are beginning to read. And they become objects in themselves for a while. And these are the bridges connecting across, sometimes very open to the courtyards and sometimes closed. You start to see the change of the columns, whether the 3.6, 1.2 is in the north-south grid, and sometimes then they're changing to take the diaphragm walls east-west.
So, in dialogue with gravity, we were trying to suspend, as we've said, a whole world above ground to make a space which would be between that world, the beams of offices above and the city below. And just seeing how that came about, we're looking up at a roof beam which spans between the diaphragm walls. This is the 25-metre span, and you start to see the tie rods hanging, waiting for the floor slabs of the offices to go in. A really crazy way to build, because they had to. We were so shocked. I mean, something we hadn't thought about. They had to build the formwork right from minus 12 metres right up to the roof to support the roof beam, pour the roof beam, take it all away, take away all the scaffolding, and put in a separate set of scaffolding for each of the floor plates. So there was two huge works in terms of scaffolding and the sequencing of the forming of the structure, and how that starts to reveal itself on the site. And just I mentioned the kind of effort that went into this project, and there were moments when we were genuinely humbled when we came on the site and just saw the effort and the scale of concentration and dedication and work that was needed. We're in a roof beam. This is the post tensioning, and then this is the top of the diaphragm wall. The roof beams are 3.6 metres deep. They house the servicing, and it's a composite of steel and concrete. This is a steel clamp waiting for the roof beam to join the diaphragm wall. And then the whole post-tensioning process and the monitoring of that post-tensioning of the rods, the kind of scale of quantity of reinforcement. And in the project, we brought some, the Irish Concrete Society were the first Irish people to see this project, and they were they were so excited. It was really interesting to have a group of 20 very excited Irish engineers looking deep into the shuttering and oohing and eyeing at the scale of the work. What continually amazed us was the continuing invention at every level of the team of builders and engineers and concrete foremen. And in a way this encapsulated it. We didn't want prefabricated fillings to the shuttering holes in the columns because they looked too plasticky. And the guy who was in charge of the concrete, he just drank espresso all day and sucked cigarettes all day. And he suddenly realised that his espresso cup was exactly the same size as the hole for the shuttering in the columns. And so they cast these little concrete dowels, thousands and thousands of them on the side from the espresso cup, because it just fitted. And that was ongoing, that kind of continuing invention and imagination and skill. And again, just to finish, looking at the sense of the beginnings of the suspended soffits of the offices above, and the scale of the works and the scale of the shuttering required. Here it's still up in one bay, it's down in the next, and how the whole thing was sequenced along the length of the site. And the building at this stage is virtually finished. The envelope is finished. The fit out of the offices hasn't started, and neither has the fit out of the auditorium. Here we're standing in the undercroft of the floating library. We're looking towards the Alagbini, which is the Greeley Street. We see the auditorium rising out of the ground, and the clear glass screen which allows the citizen to look deep into the public spaces of the university. The chepo stone which is used on the soffit as well as on the facades. And we've mixed stone with concrete depending on the condition, depending where we needed insulation, where we didn't need insulation. And they merge very well, the concrete and the stone. And then as you enter the building, we're at foyer, we're moving down a grand staircase to a white marble floor at 5 metres below ground. We've used chepo on the ground level, we've used it on the public space, and it comes right through the floor of the project at ground level, but for reasons of reflection of light, we've used a lighter stone at the lower level. So you see the flank of the auditorium and the clear story of the suspended garden, which brings light into that public space. And the engagement of the interior spaces with the elevations of the streets around. Again, that is much stronger than we anticipated, and a real sort of discovery. The big moves of the ramp, connecting students down to the conference level. It's an exterior space, but in the undercroft of one of the hanging office bars above. And yeah, the scale of that stair within the structure. Again, we've used the chepo stone on the floor, and these beams, which are structural, are concrete and they're not clad. Being at -9 below ground, you can see the scale of, this is just a service door, but you can see the scale of sort of normal doors within the scale of the volume. We're looking up to the main foyer level at 5 metres below ground. The entrance courtyard, which is outside, looking into this interior space. Way in the distance, you can see what is an external space, which gives clear story light into a foyer, which is deep in this direction. And then you can start to see the offices above. And again, being at the lower level, looking up to this kind of reflective veil of glass in contrast with the sort of massive undercroft. This is an external stepped courtyard which takes one from 0 down to 9 metres below ground, and the world of the university connecting through. The bridges, some of them, as you're all saying, are open, and some are quite closed, depending on how the structure hits them, and depending on what work they have to do structurally. And that was a continuing battle between us really and the structural engineer, because ideally we wanted the bridges to be open, but sometimes it wasn't possible. So in a way, many of the elevations, as well as the spaces being non-compositional, the elevations of course are controlled, but they're not composed. They're very much a product of the strategy as well. So when you enter the office foyer, there's the street, there's the street outside, and again we made this grand stair, which is also a social space for the 1,000 professors, where you move up through the whole world of the offices. So really all the offices are entered from the front, and the space is lit from the top. We call it the sort of nave space, where we have this louvered glazed roof light, which in some ways has a very nice rhythm in terms of the way the rhythm of these prefabricated stair. These steps are prefabricated and span between these two beams. And these beams are quite long. I mean, this was quite a challenging stair for the engineer as well, because it's spanning 25 metres, and he used intermediate landings to try and stitch that structure back into the main body of the structure. And you can see the tie rods where the structure is hanging and where the stair is hanging. And what's very nice is the light in this space is quite different, because you get the pattern of the louvers on the wall, and that with the rhythm of the stair works really well. So we're hoping that this will work as this sort of more private social space for the 1,000 professors, and that it's their grand hall or their grand nave space. And then just looking at this material on the floor, and that same material is used. It starts on the pavement and it goes right through the whole ground floor. And we brought the same stone, all the main stair. The stairs and ramps are clad in the same stone, so it's like as if the ground is being brought down to the lower levels. And hopefully this sense of the kind of monolithic quality of taking the Milanese stone and using it in the same way that they use it, which is to fix it directly to the concrete with between 1 and 3 millimetre joints, so it doesn't feel like a cladding, but it feels monolithic. And looking at the end gable and the crack between the library and the auditorium, and then starting to penetrate this building. This public space feels very nice, actually. It feels much more generous than we imagined. They're not great photos, I have to say, but we just took what we had. And moving deeper into this nave space, where you're looking, the main stair I've just showed you is in here. So this is the professor's hall, and then the entrance to the building is just here. And moving into the glassy, reflective, lighter world of the interior, again the office world with its bridge connections to the library. And this facade we developed with an Italian firm, Société, where we've used a double layer for, as I say, for both environmental shading and for privacy. Because some of the courtyards are quite small, and there was a need for professors not to be completely overlooked. But it started as a shading device and then became a privacy device. And we spent a lot of time trying to conceal the fixings. So the only fixings that you see are at the top level. Otherwise, the fixings are hidden behind the lap of one glass sheet over another. Because we really didn't want this to feel like a high-techy kind of project. We wanted it to have a more mute presence. And then here we see it taking its place in the sky line of Milan. We're looking at the roof of the library, which is also clad in the same stone, and the offices stretching up above that shield, and in the background the Torre Velasquez. And the interlocking volumes of the library, and how the kind of wall that they make in terms of the secondary street. It's a similar language, but it's not the same. And it does give privacy to the apartments across the way, because that street is not so wide. And it gives that sense of the sort of sculptural quality of the elevation onto the Albertini, returning around onto Viorantican. And how the stitching of the offices, stitched down into the Alemania, and we make these cuts of light into little meeting rooms, they're almost like found spaces in the double lining between the outer and the inner wall. So there would be little green rooms and meeting rooms in these spaces. And it's a more ragged edge on the southern edge where it hits the apartment buildings, because the idea was that we wouldn't offer a sheer wall where it hits the kind of informal world of their apartments overlooking this elevation. So we were trying to just let the building more gently hit the boundary on the southern edge. So we're looking at what is a service stairs, again 9 metres below ground, and the cantilevered bars of offices above. And in a way, this image gives a sense of that kind of labyrinthine quality that one feels as one moves around the building, and how it sits on the street. I mean, it seems very assertive in many ways and maybe uncompromising, but it also has gentler moments where it kind of folds. It folds and twists and nudges its way from the primary Diaphragm into the public space which we've made at this point. And we like these images because they're very sort of Milanese. It's very typical Milanese, foggy, kind of yellow light. And the component parts of that elevation close up, and how the windows reflect the city, and how the two worlds start to meet and hopefully will happily coexist in the future. And we love this image because one feels you can almost smell Milan. And Milan has a very particular kind of smell because it's polluted and there's no wind, and it's very humid and it's foggy, and it has its trams. Unfortunately, these are all going, really beautiful trams, and yeah, so it's there. Thank you.